Hey guys, I'm Jonas. Today we're going to be going over how to install the high-speed gear set in your Yamaha Drive1 or Drive2 that has this style of Schafer transaxle. Now Yamaha used this style of transaxle in the 2015 and 16 Drive1s as well as the 2017 to current Drive2s that are the non-Quiet Tech models and the Adventurer models. Now we do have these high-speed gear sets as well as the Maxima gear oil and suspension clean that we're going to be using today available on our website at powerequipmentman.com. Now installing these high-speed gear sets is a little bit more of a complicated process. You're going to need a pretty good set of hand tools and some good mechanical knowledge to be able to complete this task. Now if you decide after watching this video that this is too much of a project for you to try to tackle yourself, you may be able to go talk to one of your local golf cart shops and see if they would be able to install these high-speed gears for you. Now this is a cart that we already had tore apart, so I'm not going to go over step by step on how to remove the axle from the machine, but I'll give you a quick overview of what needs to happen to be able to do it. Now the first thing that you're going to want to do is jack the back of the cart up and set the frame of the cart up on jack stands. We're going to need to be able to have the cradle assembly move separately from the frame. So once you've got the frame of your cart set on jack stands, you can move the floor jack around to support the cradle itself, not on the axle, but underneath of the cradle, so that we can drop that cradle down and unbolt the axle and roll it out, but still have your floor jack supporting the cradle that's going to have the engine bolted to it. Now once you've got your cart up on jack stands, you're going to want to remove the drive belt as well as the driven clutch, then remove your forward and reverse cables as well as both throttle cables going to the governor arm. You're also going to need to remove both brake cables going to the brake drums. Next, you're going to pull the bolt out of the bottom of your panhard bar and swing it up out of the way, and then you can remove the bolts from the bottom of your rear shocks. This should allow you to lower your floor jack to let that engine cradle come down. Once you've got that cradle dropped down far enough that you can get to the 4 bolts on each side of the axle, you can unbolt the axle and roll the axle out from under the machine. If you don't have enough clearance, you may need to go ahead and remove your tires now. We're going to start out by removing the cover from the rear diff. Once you've got all the bolts out, you can use a flathead screwdriver to gently pry that cover off. Be careful not to bend the cover or damage your housing. Then we can remove the castle nut from the end of each axle shaft and remove the brake drum from both sides of your axle. Now use a set of snap ring pliers to remove the inner snap ring from the axle tube. Then you should be able to pull the axle shaft straight out of the axle tube. Repeat this on the other side. Now we're going to remove the 4 bolts that are holding the axle caps on either side of the differential housing. Then you can slide the differential out of the housing. You will need to use a set of vernier calipers like I'm using here, or some sort of accurate measuring device to measure how high this detent set screw is protruding from the case. When we reinstall this set screw later, it needs to be set to the same height. Then remove this screw from the housing and the spring and ball that is located underneath of it. Next, we're going to remove all the bolts from this side cover and then gently remove the cover while trying to push in on the input shaft so that the gears stay inside of the housing. Now you can carefully remove the lower set of gears and the shift shaft at the same time. You want to try to keep all the gears on the shaft if possible, and make sure that you have one washer on each end of the shaft. Then you can remove your input shaft. This shaft should have a washer on the far end as well. Now take a few minutes to get everything cleaned up. We use a brass brush to scrub off all the gasket residue, and then we use suspension clean or brake clean to really get the inside of that housing cleaned up. You can also get the gear assemblies cleaned up while you've got them on the bench as well. When reassembling, I like to use Loctite or this anaerobic gasket maker on all of the bolts. We will be torquing these bolts down after we reinstall the differential into the housing. To install our smaller gear, we just need to remove the washer from the end of the gear set, slide the old gear off and the new gear on. Now we're going to reassemble this in the same order that we took it apart in, but you do need to make sure that the governor arm gets re-engaged into the slots on the governor assembly. Make sure that your washers are on each end of the gear set and you have your shift shaft installed on top of the gears as shown here. Then install the whole assembly as one piece. Now it is a little bit trickier to install this secondary gear set. You do need to make sure that the roll pin on the shift shaft is sliding into the groove on the shift fork as you're installing this assembly. Then you'll want to apply a coat of some RTV silicone on your cover and then reinstall the cover back onto the housing. Tighten these bolts in a crisscross pattern. Torque spec on these bolts is 23 foot-pounds. Then you're going to want to make sure that you can spin your input shaft and move the shift shaft back and forth between forward and reverse. Now we can reinstall the detent ball, spring, and set screw and set our height back to the same measurement that we took earlier. Then we can reinstall our differential assembly back in the housing. Again, I like to use a little bit of the anaerobic gasket maker on these bolts while reassembling. The axle bearing cap bolts need to be torqued down to 40 foot-pounds. Now you can torque down your ring gear bolts to 40 foot-pounds as well. Then reinstall your axle shaft and snap ring on both sides. I like to apply some grease to all the splines on your axle shaft before installing them. Then install your brake drum along with the washer, castle nut, and cotter pin. Repeat this on the other side. Finally, you can apply some RTV silicone to the rear diff cover and reinstall the cover onto the housing. You'll want to reinstall your cover bolts and tighten in a crisscross pattern to a final torque of 20 foot-pounds. Now you can refill the rear diff with oil through the fill plug. We use an 80-90 weight gear oil and it should hold approximately 16 ounces. Now, one thing that you need to understand about installing a set of high-speed gears like this in your cart is that you're going to lose some of your bottom end torque. So you're going to gain top speed, but lose some of your bottom end power. You can find all these parts on our website at powerequipmentman.com. Well, that's going to wrap it up for today, guys. If you got some good value out of this video, please hit that thumbs up button. Consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.